Hey everybody, welcome back. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're really going to start talking about taking Databricks and uh, putting Unity Catalog on top of it. So that's kind of a new concept. So first of all, we have at this point we have our four Databricks workspaces, and we can go into any one of these workspaces at the moment, and they are really independent from one another. They're just workspaces, and that's it. And what I've navigated to is the catalog section within Databricks, and I'm on my hub workspace. And what I'm looking at is just this default Hive Metastore, and that's it. There's not really anything else going on here. So if you're not really that familiar with this whole ecosystem and what's so cool about it, it I think helps to take a step back in time. And so I've got a series of posts here about setting up an on-prem data lake. So an on-prem data lake, or just a data lake in general. The idea was really distribution, so distributed computing and distributed resources. So well, we can really break this into three major pieces. It will be storage, compute, and then in the middle I'll say the metastore. So the big thing with Hadoop was it allowed for you to have multi-node clusters for storage. And similarly, Spark allows for multi-node clusters for compute, and then Hive kind of sits there in the middle and says, "Well, hey, I'll sit on top of your data, your files, and I want to give you this metadata layer." So it's like an information schema that's kind of attached to your files, and gives you a way that you can easily query those. For a time, all of this was held within Hadoop, so within their clusters. And if we were to take a look, I've got a Proxmox lab right now, where kind of what I've got is two 3 node clusters. So I've got a 3 node cluster for Spark, so I've got my Spark master, and then my Spark workers, and then I've got a Hadoop master, and then some Hadoop slaves. So when we have a setup like this, just imagine that you have a compute resource and you want to scale that vertically, but at a certain point you can't add any more compute or RAM or even potentially hard drives to a given machine or to a given node. And so what Hadoop was allowing people to do was simply add more nodes to expand the size of their clusters. For a while, Spark was sitting kind of on top of that. And what we've got now is kind of this separation down the middle where we can now have the storage can be decoupled from the compute. So it's kind of cool. I've got a whole, like I said, I've got a whole series um, of notes on this. So if you want to run through the lab, you can do that. So you can say, well, hey, like how do we set up a Hadoop cluster? We've got notes on that. So you'll end up with something that looks like this. So if you've ever wanted to play around with Hadoop on-prem, it's totally open source. You can do that. Um, I've got one. So after you set up your storage, you'll want to set up Hive on top of that. Not mandatory, but it helps you out. So you can set up Hive as a secondary piece, and then you can set up your Spark clusters as something else as well. So I've kind of got all that running for the lab. So you set these pieces up, and what you get to is just kind of this kind of baseline setup of Databricks. And what Databricks does is it kind of packages it up nicely for you. But like I said, right now we just have this Hive Metastore. We haven't even talked about unifying it yet. And so kind of back to this general project, one of our big goals is not just to have this distributed computing platform, distributed computing and storage platform, but also to unify that. And so while it's important to understand that, yeah, we can have Hive and we can work off of this by itself, what we can also do is have a centralized Hive Metastore or a centralized Metastore and then assign that out to the various workspaces. And then what we can do is tie that in with Active Directory so that our whole platform is governed. So kind of at this point, what we might do is hop on over to the code again and let's take a look. The first thing that I want to do is point out the blast radius. So I'm treating the infrastructure that I've set up as infrastructure. And this next section, what we're going to do is we're looking at this more as Unity catalog permissions. So it's going to step outside of our traditional dev, QA, and prod plans. And instead, we're going to have it in its own Unity catalog folder. So one of the first things that I want to do is take a look at the hub. This is probably going to be the most important piece of this. So I'm also going to, when I do this, I'm going to take an output of the Metastore ID because I'll use that in the other environments. So the first thing that I want is I want to point to my Unity hub module. And so for my module, for this, I'm going to go to my modules, and I've got this broken out into unity.hub and then unity.spoke. So for unity.hub, right now I've just got my configuration pieces, so my config data, config locals, my providers blocks, which this is kind of special. I'm pushing my providers blocks up into the module because we're going to be switching from using the default Azure providers to now using Databricks providers. So this is just kind of the baseline of everything that I need. But now it's time to talk about the actual resources we're going to create. And the very first thing that we're going to create is the actual Metastore itself. So I'm going to bring in my Metastore file. And so let's talk about what that's going to look like. We've got the access connector, and this access connector is going to grant me access for the Metastore. And so this is going to have a system assigned identity, and we're going to just give this a name for the time being. Next up, we're going to create a role for it. And so this is just going to be my Unity catalog storage account role. And for this one, what we're going to do is grant it the storage blob data contributor role. We're going to give this the scope of my Metastore ID. And the next thing that we're going to do is assign a principal to it. So for this one, we're just going to extract the identity or the principal ID out of that connector that I just showed you. Then we're going to have the Databricks providers, and this is really important to understand the I guess the level of the provider that we're working with. So in this case, we're looking at the workspace level. So this is going to be assigned to the workspace, and you're going to go back and forth between workspace and account level. So account level is kind of like global, and then workspace level is like an individual workspace within your account. So when we start building this out, we're going to have, I'll show you, we'll have 4 workspaces, and they will all be backed by the same Databricks account. So within this, I guess I should not gloss over what the details are here. So we are creating a Databricks Metastore. It's important to know that you can only have one Metastore here. So we have a Metastore, a default Hive Metastore in every single Databricks workspace at the moment. But to apply this type of data governance, what we're doing is unifying it. So we're basically saying, well, we're going to have one Metastore, and that's going to be our master Metastore, and then we're going to assign that out to the various workspaces. So we've got this one kind of main Metastore. I'm just going to give it a very generic name of Metastore. I'm pointing this storage root to the storage account that we had created previously, and we'll just call this Metastore. So it's going to be pretty simple. Next up, I am extracting this data block, which helps me find, if I go back to my data block in this section, I am pulling out my storage account for my Metastore. So I just wanted to show you that I am grabbing that. So it's something that I created in a previous video. Let's see, and then the provider, this is a really important piece. So for me, the provider piece is to my alias provider, and my alias provider is, let's see, it's the workspace one. So I have to pass my host to it. So I might talk to you about this host piece in a minute as well. But for this one, I am grabbing this from a data block. So if I go into this, I've got my storage account, and then I've also got my Databricks workspace. And so for the Databricks workspace, what I'm doing is I'm basically saying, well, hey, let me go into my subscription. So I'm in my default subscription. Within that, I want to point to my resource group, and then I want to find the Databricks workspace by name that's within that resource group. So I'm essentially finding and identifying the workspace itself. And then for my provider, I'm saying, okay, well, now that I know the workspace, I want to grab the URL from it. And so I'm just going to alias this as my workspace level Databricks provider. So now that I've got that, Now, when I work with this, I can set that up as one of my providers. Okay, so once we actually create the Metastore itself, now we have to grant access to it. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll grab that Metastore ID that we just created, and we're going to create a Metastore access managed identity for this. So I'm being, pretty explicit with this name here. And then next up, we're going to say, like, we've got this Azure managed identity. And so I just want to point to the connector ID that I literally just created a minute ago. So that's up there in my code. What else? I'll scroll up so you can see that real quick. So the Databricks access connector, and we have this up here, the Databricks access connector. So I'm just grabbing that out. And again, this is going to be with my Databricks provider that we have pulled into this module. All right, what else? So we've got the Databricks Metastore assignment. So this is kind of where we assign this to one of our primary workspaces. So what I am doing right now is taking this Metastore, and as I'm creating it, I'm grabbing the ID of it, I'm grabbing the ID of the workspace, and then I am grabbing the provider for this account. So remember, before we were looking at workspace level, now we're looking at account level. And so what's cool about this is, if you recall, we have multiple workspaces. So now I'm doing an account level resource, and the account level resource is going to help me do governance across all of the workspaces within my account. So with that said, I think we've got all the code set up here that we need to set up my first big Metastore. And so what I want to do is navigate to my Unity Catalog hub. So let's check my directory real quick. So I want to cd into my plans, ls cd into unity.catalog. Oops. cd unity.catalog. If I can spell, that'd be nice. Clear that out. ls, we're going to change into my hub. ls one more time. All right, I want to do that main file, so that should be good for me. So before I do anything, I want to make sure that I am using my hub subscription. All right, now Terraform apply. And I don't think that this one takes too long because it's not really building anything. It's more so, well, it's building a couple of things, and then it's really setting permissions. It's kind of the main thing. So I'm going to pause this for just a minute while it builds, and then we'll return. Okay, so now it's prompting us to say that we want to build this. There's 5 resources. I'll say yes. And again, some of these are, I'm considering these to be pet resources, so we're not going to be working with these all the time. You can work with these if you want to put this into a true CI/CD pipeline. The big thing though is I would make sure to separate this section of modules, your Unity, from your other modules. So even though we've got Databricks sitting in one environment, I would put this Unity in a separate one so that when you get to, we'll say let's go to our CI/CD pipeline real quick. If you wanted to put this into a CI/CD pipeline, let's go over to my actions, and we'll just take a look at one of the recent ones that it created. If you wanted to put this into a pipeline where we've got, we'll say like our QA plan and our QA apply, that could be what's building out our Databricks workspaces. I would add a separate step that's downstream to apply the Unity changes. Otherwise, you're going to have some issues with the way that the APIs time with one another, and so they don't play well being stateful. So this worked, and I've grabbed my Metastore ID out, so we'll need that later on. So if I hop back into this, let's do a refresh. Give it just a second. Okay, so at the top we now see that we have a Metastore assigned here. So this one has a Metastore. If we hop on over here, now we can do a manage account. And so this is where we get into having some additional features, and we can see what my workspaces are. And so if I take a look at my hub workspace, we'll see that we've got the Metastores assigned, but they are not assigned to the individual workspaces yet. So that's kind of that first part. So we've set up the Metastore, and in our next video, what we're going to do is kind of build off of this and start bringing the other workspaces into it as well. So I'll see you in a few.